All right, everybody, let's get this thing started. Welcome to today's webinar, How Online Learning Delivery Tools Are Changing the Evolving Business Landscape. My name is Ryan Perzik. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Lambda Solutions, and we are going to start off with a few housekeeping items. Firstly, the presentation today is approximately 30 minutes. We'll be peppering Q&A sessions throughout the presentation, but you can ask your questions at any time. You can ask a question by going to your GoToWebinar panel. It should have popped up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen when you first logged in. There should be a little gray bar there that says questions. If you click on that gray bar, it'll drop down and you can put your questions in there. In addition to questions, if you're having any technical issues, audio, video, whatever it is, if you can, let us know in that questions box and we'll actively be trying to resolve those as the webinar goes on. If we can't get to the other side of any technical issues, don't worry, the webinar is going to get emailed out with all the handouts and all of that stuff, so you'll have access to everything. You'll be able to watch it on demand. A little bit about Lambda Solutions. Lambda Solutions is a learning technology company. We've been in business for over 15 years, and we have a product called the Lambda Suite. The Lambda Suite is for small to medium businesses that are trying to sell, market, or analyze e-learning. Basically, our product allows companies to sell any learning product in any market to any customer type at scale, which is the reason why we're doing this webinar today. Digital learning has become more and more important for companies today. COVID is a huge driver of that, obviously, but some of the traditional drivers are still at play. People are looking to be more scalable, reach a larger audience, stay relevant, be competitive. And a lot of companies, when they make their journey to digital learning and to having an online presence, they get a little intimidated by the learning tech stack. It can be a daunting task sometimes, which is why I'm super excited to introduce our guest speaker today, Leah Chang. She has over 17 years of experience in the learning technology field. She's an instructional designer, entrepreneur, and founder of Leah Chang Learning, and she's an all-around rad human being. She's been in the learning trenches with corporations and nonprofits alike, helping them deliver quality learning. Today, her team offers end-to-end e-learning services from customer course design, employee learning strategy, and LMS management. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Leah now. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Ryan. And you too are a rad human being. That's a nice introduction.
I fought saying that. It dates me so badly, but
It's all right. Well, that's the whole point about being personal, and that's what we do at Leah Chang Learning. I love my job in the sense that I get to work with all sorts of organizations to help them with their learning journey. So just going to get started with a territorial acknowledgement. And I know we have a lot of people joining us from all over the world. So I live in very close to Vancouver, British Columbia, in a city called New Westminster. And it's the unceded territory of the Kakite Nation, as well as an important meeting ground for many of the Coast Salish nations. So this is on the South Pacific coast of Canada, for those of you from other parts of the world. And I have a couple personal objectives today, as well as some collective objectives. So I know that we have some instructional designers or leaders of teams of instructional designers. And I just want us to pause and celebrate how far we've come over the last year and a half. So a couple of the things we're going to do together are identifying 5 or 6 common problems that online learning is solving right now and will continue being a driver for in the future. There's a few tools today I'm going to give you where you can use that to assess where you're at in your organization in terms of, you know, how far have you come and where do you still need a bit of focus in terms of your online learning and your tech stack. And we're going to talk about some examples of business success and how they're using online learning to achieve that. Personally, I'm been on a journey to increase my awareness for as an instructional designer, but also as an employer, to improve my learning and my familiarity with website and online learning accessibility. So if you notice me describing some things today that are on the screen, it's to help people access what all of us may be able to see, but for those who can't see, then that's a good way for them participate. So I'm hoping I can try practicing some of the image on the screen today. So what you see today is a common expression that 2020 was the year that broke corporate training, or traditional corporate training. And thank goodness for that. So we've seen some very poor examples of corporate training in the past, but we're also seeing some amazing ways to sort of shift that. And I think that the last year, everything that the world has gone through has allowed us to make these big changes. Digital adoption is here, and also we've really been able to shift and pivot. And I know that those words are almost overly used, but it's time to celebrate this, especially for the instructional designers and the people leaders that are out there. And I want to have a quick poll just to gauge sort of where you're at in your organization. So I'll get Akriti to launch the poll for us. And the question I would like to ask you is, how would you gauge where your business is at in terms of how broken is the corporate training in your organization? So the question here is, where would you gauge where your business is at in terms of, just how much of adoption of learning technology and strategy you've seen since the pandemic? So is it the same? It's sort of status quo. Maybe you're already doing a really great job, which is awesome. Or, we've seen some small improvements, but, we have yet to make some significant ones. There are some significant changes, and we're not sure how they will be adopted long term, but we're curious. And then, of course, we're really embracing the change, or we've completely made the shift. So I'll give you a few more seconds to vote, and Akriti, maybe you can show us those results. I'm kind of curious to see who we've got joining us today and where they're at in their journey. Okay. Let's shut that one down. So what kind of results did we get? Oh, hey, this is exciting. I'm so glad to see that 40%, 47% are really seeing significant changes and improvements to the learning delivery. That's great. And wow, 13% have seen extensive changes and they're shifted completely. And this is really the trend we're seeing. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you too can achieve that success. Awesome. Thank you. So back to our slides. And today we're going to talk about 5 examples, but again, there are so many more examples of what you can and what you may want to take advantage of in terms of how online learning can really inform your business practice. So again, these are just 5 I'm hoping to summarize, but if you have others, feel free to enter those in the question box at any time. So before we get started, and as a true instructional designer, I'm always trying to engage your neural pathways. So before we jump right in, I just want you to pause and think about it for a second. If you had to pick the biggest change that you've witnessed in online learning technology in the last little while, what would that be? And it's okay if you have, different answers. So just take a second. If you like, you can answer it in the question box, but you don't have to. And then I want you to think about what's the second biggest change you've seen. So this could be specific to your industry, your business, or just in general. Okay, so keep those things in mind, and we're going to go through. The first change that I'd like to really celebrate and to draw our attention to is, let's talk about how we've been able to create better employee experiences. Holy smokes, has the world changed, right? So in the past, we heard a lot of no's. Nope, sorry, you can't work from home. No, you can't attend the training from home. No, you're going to have to come in, or you're going to fly down, or you're going to attend this in person. No, you have to go. Or we heard a lot of, we don't need training for that. No, we don't need to develop that. Or, when some keeners would sort of initiate or propose some ideas to sort of change things up a bit, we heard some resistance to that. Like, oh, people aren't going to use that, or no, they're not going to engage in that, or I don't think people are really going to embrace that, especially when we're talking about employee forums or social learning or any of those sort of fancier add-ons. But the thing is, things have changed, right? From an employee perspective, we heard a lot of, oh, I have to go to training tomorrow, or, for organizations that had a mix of in-office and remote participants in terms of meetings, those are always very inconsistent and poor experiences. So When we read in Training Magazine that 2020 broke traditional corporate training, that's a good thing, right? So what we're, some of the questions we can draw our awareness to are, hey, how good was the training before? How measurable were your learning outcomes? Were you achieving what you were intending to? I know some organizations had extensive catering budgets, travel expenses, even in this day and age, right? And employees, were not necessarily pleased with the experience on both sides. So for those in office or for those in remote situations, it was never quite a right fit. And so today we can celebrate that things have shifted entirely. So, it's common to say, see you on Zoom. The fact that my own mother is on Zoom and she's giving me tips on how to use it. There's a huge uptake of cloud-based collaborative tools, and isn't that great? There's less resistance in terms of adopting tools like, collaborative meeting spaces, social learning like forums, or other collaborative tools like Slack. And what we're seeing is a democratization of the workforce. So in the past, we might have had a bunch of people in a boardroom, and somebody was dialing in and they could never really hear what was going on. And today we now have a screen where all the leaders and the employees are equal. And so they're able to participate equally. And so things have really changed in terms of what we're expecting of our workforce, and so have our needs for training and development in the corporate world. And lastly, I'm really excited about this one. There is less of an appetite and openness to understanding that crash courses or the one and done course are really not beneficial for employees. And there's so many reasons and instructional design principles behind that. So working from home is here to stay, whether or not the organization goes back or whether they go back partially, but there will be an increased acceptance to e-learning, to blended learning, and we're going to talk about hybrid learning in a few minutes. And of course, we're seeing a huge uptake of social learning to build team culture, to set expectations, to keep people engaged, and also to check in with employees. So I love to talk about case studies. I'm going to use examples mostly from Canada, but they apply, of course, to other parts of the world. So I've worked with a regional safety-based business, very important mandate, and huge region in terms of geography. And so they had about 200 to 300 employees across a very large region. And there was always sort of a little bit of a shift and a little bit of a divide in between, the field workers versus people in the satellite offices. And then even a bit of a divide between, the satellite offices and head office, right? And whenever these groups of people would collaborate and meet together, it was a poor mixed experience. And so we used to call those mixed meetings. Some people would be in person, some people would be calling in off their phone or car phone. Some of them would be, joining through Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but not quite using the technology fully. And so it just created a very disjointed experience. And so their shift is, instead of doing town halls and those types of sessions and events in person at head office with people dialing in on their phone, they shifted to webinars with breakout rooms. And because now their organization is properly trained and confident using these online tools, it's been a better experience for all. And the uptake in increased engagement is huge and also very measurable. So not only are they improving the employee experience, but they're also able to improve the digital technology skills of their workforce and keep supporting them as well. So how does this relate to your business? Well, there's a couple of things that we're definitely able to focus on. One is we're seeing an increased need to support organizational culture in the virtual workforce. There's a need for consistent remote leadership. Like, the term leadership and the words remote were never really combined before, but this is a thing nowadays, right? And of course, during the pandemic, we saw an increased need for health and wellness and mental health supports. And those are now being woven into organizational culture and development learning opportunities. And how great is that? These are things we should have been doing before, but somehow technology has helped us make that leap, right? So time to celebrate. Another area of focus is because we have a more remote workforce, we're seeing a huge need for digital systems training, cybersecurity awareness, and also hardware. So a lot of organizations sort of loosened up their cybersecurity protocols because they had to enable a workforce to work from home. But that does increase some needs and some awareness around, digital safety and all those kinds of things. So we're seeing that this shift to a remote workforce is still helping us drive the organizational development and the type of learning opportunities that we're focused on for employees. So what happens from here? If you look at the date, it might be a little small, but this is an image of an icon of an illustrated image of 76%. So online learners were using their own devices to access course content in 2018, and the number was about 76%. Well, in 2018, 76%, it's definitely changed today. So we don't have the numbers yet. In 2021, we're still measuring and evaluating sort of how the world has changed, but I'm gonna guess that this number is significantly higher. So in 2021, we're gonna see a lot of change in terms of increased policies for remote access to company information, and probably a greater need for delivering hardware or delivering some cybersecurity training. So this is where you can start to sort of apply this learning to your organization. So here are some of the tools that we do have at our fingertips nowadays. If you have a robust learning management system or you have a really great tech stack, the question is, are you leveraging your tools? So how are you using social learning to support employee experience and engagement? Are you using surveys within your LMS? Are you using forums? Are you using facilitated or coaching sort of assignments and feedback within your system, or is that sort of outside of that? And how are you continuing to learn about, just being part of the culture? Do you have organizational culture woven into your learning sessions or learning activities? And what else would that look like? So, you might want to add your own there. So that's sort of the first reason. I'm just going to summarize. It's just good business to support a remote workforce very intentionally through virtual means, right? So, it's not going to go away. And there are fantastic ways to engage and support employees to provide the type of learning that they need when they need it, and to model those examples. All right, so I'm going to move to number 2. And this was really exciting. Finally, we're seeing a broad acceptance of e-learning. If I had that like woohoo celebrate icon, I'd hit it right now. So in the past, as instructional designers, we would be pitching or proposing some ideas, and we would always hear this: you can't learn that in e-learning, or you can't do that virtually. Or no, just leave that to the trainers. The subject matter experts will take care of that. They're doing fine with their in-person sessions. Or they would say, that's going to take way too long to develop. We don't have the budget. Or maybe next year, well, we love the idea, but we don't have enough trainers to deliver that. Like, that's going to take, 200 people, 20 hours each, et cetera, et cetera. So we heard a lot of nope. And now, of course, we have a much better understanding of, hey, this is possible. We have a little bit more skilled workforce in terms of the instructional designers and the learning experience designers that are available to us. So if you see the term LXD in the slides here, that's what that refers to. And as an instructional designer, it's a great time to be doing our work. There's so many rapid design tools out there. We have a lot of things available to us at our fingertips to create some very meaningful, very impactful, timely learning. And, return on investment calculations have changed. Essentially, what we're seeing are different ways to measure and evaluate the impact of learning. And so with higher sort of design time, okay, we have to put a little bit more effort into creating some really impactful online or hybrid learning, but there is zero facilitation time. And so there are fewer people hours that go into the delivery of it. So how does that measure up? how does it sort of weigh out? And the businesses looking at those calculations are really doing well today. So as an instructional designer, we always look at the levels of critical thinking in our learning. And I just want to point out that apply, so that's where the practical skills come into play, are not always the highest in terms of the taxonomy of critical thinking. So when we really know and we can really engage with a topic or be a subject matter expert, we're getting into evaluating, analyzing, creating with that content, not just using it or doing it. And so here's an example, a case study I'd like to share. So fleet driver training. There are a couple examples out there where during the pandemic, some organizations who sold compliance training or fleet driver training, and particularly seasonal driver training, they were able to shift to online learning. And some people would probably say, like, how can you do that? How can you learn to drive in winter conditions on a computer? Like, that's not possible. But again, what the business is examining is how can we use the technology we have at this point in time in a way that is meaningful and in a way that doesn't just put everything on hold. So instead of seeing the pandemic as a barrier, what they did is they were able to shift to using, I'm just going to go back to the Bloom's taxonomy, using e-learning and blended learning to really draw into that conceptual space. So down the road, when they could get back to training people in vehicles on the road, they were able to draw on that conceptual framework. And so they're able to take some of the burden off the trainer and make that time in the vehicles so much more impactful. So I think that's a great example for all of us. If fleet driver training can shift online, maybe our business can too. So keep that in mind. So here are some of the things that you can use to show the ROI or the impact of shifting what are typically considered in-person training topics, such as fleet driver training, to being maybe shifted to an online or a different type of format. So you can be using reporting features. You can show the types of engagement. You can gauge and track answers to questions really specifically. You can be creating your own custom reports. So if you have the right learning management system or the right tech stack, this should be available to you so that you can make those calls and evaluate based on hard data. So in summary, reason number 2 is when e-learning is done effectively, and by e-learning I mean globally, it could be asynchronous, it could be blended or hybrid. It's very useful to lay a conceptual foundation that you can then build on with your practical skills over time or at a later time. So as long as you're focusing on measurable objectives and you're using the neuroscience to really design the learning experience, if you're being ruthlessly honest and making sure that your learning product is effective and not just like trying to fill like a random gap, but if you're doing all that very intentionally, e-learning can be a huge part of success in your business. So remember the fleet driver training that shifted online. And of course, I have to leave number 2 with this thought, which is technology is amazing. It gives us such a license to do different things, but it's how you use it. So remember to lean on the support of instructional designers and learning technologists that are basing decisions on the neuroscience of how people learn best. All right, number 3, I'm really excited about this one. I have seen a huge increase in agility in learning experience design. And what that means for businesses is that instead of being limited to some of these things we used to do, like bring in a trainer, or that's going to take too long to develop, no, we'll have to do that some other way, or that sounds great, but we just don't have the budget for that. Or particularly from the instructional designer's perspective, I can't build or design that fast, or what you're asking from me is impossible, like that's not realistic. So instead of that, what we're seeing today is an increased agility on, hey, we'd like to accomplish this, or this is important to the business. How do you advise that we tackle this? Or what are some of the options we have to deliver something of this nature. So expectations have become more realistic. We're also able to design on our end as instructional designers and learning experience designers with tools that are more agile. So we can create video a lot faster. We can create interactive video even faster. We have, some more flexible production expectations. For example, it's okay if your Zoom screen's a little bit grainy, or if your video is not as slick and high quality as it used to be. People understand, right? So things have become more realistic. I talked a bit about interactive video. There's some really great tools that make it very simple to sort of pause in a video and ask questions, and that's really good from a learning perspective. So we're seeing a lot of increased use of in-LMS authoring tools. And what that means is there's a shift away from just SCORM. And so SCORM, of course, being the shareable content object that you can create, export, and then usually house in any learning management system, which is great, and SCORM will never completely go away. However, what that means is that it's not very agile. So it takes longer to make an edit. It takes a few more minutes to republish it and re-upload and test it, make sure it's working. If you're using in-house or in-LMS authoring tools, you can make the change right then and there, and it's instant for your audience. So what we're seeing is that people are more open to trying out different tools for what works with their business. And the good thing for us as external consultants is we're seeing an approach to combine with internal teams to sort of provide some strategy and direction, and just ask those questions like, have you tried this? Would you consider this? You may find benefit in this. So we're seeing a shift to, okay, let's pilot this, and then we can iterate. Let's go from here. So I'm kind of curious, I'm just gonna ask a question. You're welcome to answer in the chat or the question box, or you can just think about this. I'm curious if your organization is 100% reliant on SCORM, or if you're not, or if you had to gauge the spectrum, how important is SCORM to your organization? And what I would like to challenge you with is, what we're seeing with successful businesses is they're able to be more agile and to work more in a more timely way the further they are reliant from SCORM. So in other words, SCORM's okay, keep using it, but don't just use SCORM. So depending on the learning management system you have, you may have in LMS features that you could use in a very much more agile way. So just something to consider. And here's a case study. This is an organization that sort of, let's call it an umbrella organization. This business had multiple members and affiliates sort of that they were sort of managing within them. And they work with a group of external trainers. So there's 6 external trainers who mostly delivered in-person and instructor-led learning for professional development purposes across this business. So one thing that my group did is we worked with these external consultants. We coached them to adopt organizationally developed and vetted e-learning and blended learning templates. So essentially, this group got their first LMS, and alongside it, in parallel with it, we helped them by coaching them with these new organizationally developed guidelines for e-learning. So not only were they given the tools and some coaching practice from industry leaders and peers to use the tools effectively because they're new to e-learning, but they were also onboarded, trained, and given enablement and confidence to use a new learning management system. So that is a huge process. And for that to be successful, you definitely want to lean on some external consultants. And one of the things that we discussed with this team was, they weren't fully prepared to work just in SCORM. So we have set up some templates for them using H5P or some LMS in-house authoring tools, which they are using with great success. So you may want to think about this case study with your business. How are you supporting the people designing your learning experiences with organizational guidelines and also the support they need to use the technology? And this brings us to some fun terms. So I'm going to go over a couple terms here, but you know what I love today is that terms such as asynchronous and synchronous learning are now part of our vernacular. Most people now understand what these terms mean, so it makes my job a lot easier. Blended learning is also a term that people fully understand, which is typically used for virtual learning. So today we're seeing something new, and Apple is kind of leading the way in terms of hybrid, or a mix of virtual blended and in-person blended learning. So what does that look like, and how would you even design and deliver that? How am I going to track that? Oh my goodness. So you can see where this goes, right? So as the world evolves, as we start to be more sophisticated with our use of online technology, we also need a more sophisticated and agile way to deliver this and track it. So hybrid learning, something a little different. It's a bit new. It is a mix of asynchronous and synchronous blended virtual learning, and may also include some in-person learning or those mixed meetings. So remember the first case study we looked at, where in the past, we couldn't really figure out how to be in a boardroom, have people calling in. Some people are on Zoom on their laptops. It was a very disjointed experience. Well, that's all going to change, and that's thanks to learning technology. As our offices grow or decrease in size, as people have more flexibility to continue working from home, as people want to consume learning on their own time, and also participate in in-person or synchronous sessions, you can see that the complexity will be increased. And so it's a really great time to figure out, are we ready for this? So let's do another really quick poll. I'm going to ask Krita to launch it. And this question is basically, if you had to stop and assess where your organization is at in terms of the hybrid learning, so a mix of the virtual, asynchronous, and synchronous blended, as well as the in-person, where would you say your business is going? So if you're currently delivering hybrid learning, great, what percentage? Or if you're not yet, but you will be, what would that percentage look like? So 0, some, so about 25%, maybe up to half, maybe 3/4, or like, yeah, we're fully doing that. That's, in fact, everything we do is about hybrid learning. So I'm really curious. This is definitely something I'd like to see and share with all of you today, just to gauge where our industries are going. Okay, I think we're good for voting, and curious about the results. Ooh, okay, we're seeing a fairly sort of broad spread here, but looks like 25% and 25 to 50% are on par. Yeah, that's great. Wow, 24% are up to 100% blended or in hybrid learning. This is exciting. This really shows how much businesses have changed, that the technology and the sophistication of the employees using it has really increased. Wow, that's great. Okay, more reason to celebrate. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So these are, oh gee, let's go back. Can you see my slides? Yeah? Okay.
You're good. Yep.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So again, this is a great time to look at the tools you have in your tech stack. What is your LMS offering, or do you have an LMS? How are you using these tools to design your learning experience? So again, LXD being learning experience design. You don't have to use them all, but what you use needs to be used intentionally. And you may want to consider and be more intentional about, why aren't we using certain things, and how could we leverage them? So to summarize, that e-learning is really helping us move forward, right? So I want to just check in and see if there have been any questions so far. And we have a couple more tips to go through, but have there been any sort of burning salient questions yet?
Yeah, so again, as mentioned, when you go to enter your questions or ask questions, it's in the GoToWebinar panel. On the right hand, it should have showed up on the right hand side of your screen, and there will be a little bar there that says questions, so you can enter them there. Well, we've had questions coming in throughout the duration of the presentation, and this first one actually really intrigued me. Because it's just representative of what so many businesses are struggling with today. It wasn't phrased in a question, but I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. We counted on offering training at large industry events as a way of acquiring new clients. That all went away with COVID. Now, it's not a question, but this is something that a lot of companies are struggling and trying to pivot around this shift, right? And we've definitely seen that with our customer group in Lambda. And Leah, maybe you could walk us through how you've helped companies, or what companies you've worked with have done to adapt to that situation.
Yeah, great. So I'm just going to rephrase that. So paraphrase it, which was, that they were counting on hosting in-person training events, and they weren't able to give those sessions anymore. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and so many industries were in the same situation. So we saw a very quick shift, and some people made some snap decisions, and that served them very well, and others didn't have the infrastructure to do that. So what I did observe is organizations across the board, from the private to public sector, even nonprofits were in the same boat. Nonprofits particularly did a lot of work in terms of, hey, we're having this fundraising dinner or gala, and all of a sudden they had to shut down, so they didn't have any funding come in. So in this chance, we could take a cue from some of the scrappy nonprofits out there who, if they had the infrastructure or they had online technology to deliver a virtual conference, or if they were able to offer a virtual silent auction instead of an in-person silent auction, they were able to shift that way and still be successful. So thank goodness for all the learning technology and other sort of technology that's out there nowadays. What's great is that there's a lot of choice. There is also a lot of support out there because you're not alone. Everyone's trying to figure out how to do this at the same time. And it also means it's more scalable. So there are actually a lot of pros to shifting an event virtually. And, my sister, who's an artist, she was saying that she attended a virtual silent auction of her artwork. And she was able, as a little avatar, to go in and out of her own gallery to view her art and engage with some of the attendees that way. So anyway, it just blows my mind. There's a lot of options, and there's a good way to scale as well. When you think about how much expense we dedicated to in-person events, the swag, the budget for the meals, etc., we can shift that into, in part, in learning technology, and how much exciting stuff we can get done there. So anyway, I could talk about this forever, but let's move on. So I think that's a really good point to mention, and actually it's going to come up in one of our case studies. So why don't we go back to that? And we'll have time for another couple questions at the end. Does that sound okay, Ryan?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So number 4 is a little bit general, but I have to just say it. Not only is online learning technology changing businesses, but it is the business nowadays. How many organizations used to have a tangible product that during the pandemic they couldn't sell, or they couldn't deliver, or they couldn't produce via the supply chain? Online learning doesn't have those issues, right? So in the past, it might have been like, oh yeah, training is a great idea, or yeah, online learning is great, but we can't really afford it. That's not really part of our business model. Or I still have customers and clients that don't have an LMS yet because they didn't need it before, or they didn't think they did. Or we were going to do that later. That was going to be like a Q1 of next year sort of thing, right? Or that some organizations, a lot of these are the nonprofits I work with, they don't have the internal resources to be systems administrators or to manage the technology. So they're sort of stuck. The other thing is they just couldn't afford to train so many people. A lot of the learning management systems out there in the past were quite expensive, or quite costly, and didn't allow you to sort of scale up, right? And nowadays we're seeing something totally different. Before it was like, that's not a product, we can't sell it. And there was this sort of lack of not understanding, but the paradigm shift had to happen for people to sort of embrace, like, wait a minute, yes, we can sell online learning. Yes, it could be our product. In fact, that could be our sole business. So what we've seen is a shift from that intangible, like, I don't really know if that will fly, to, yeah, it is going to work. So what we're seeing is that learning management technology or learning systems are no longer just for big corporations. Look at entrepreneurs. Look at, products like, you can almost sell how to learn to do anything online these days, right? Learn to play guitar online. So we're seeing that the entrepreneurs who are really successful shifted to learning online as well. What I really love is it's not just one-to-one or one to a few or one to some. So again, that's the difference between training and online learning. It's really there's no boundaries. The scalability is flexible. And of course, that leads us to how do you monetize it, right? So now learning can be your business product. It might be the only one. I mean, if anything, we've learned, and myself included as entrepreneur, that diversification of your product or your services is always healthy. But by creating new products, online learning, such as the fleet driver training online, this is really about embracing a new concept of what's possible, right? Ideally, you'll be doing this in a mix of e-learning, blended, and hybrid. So, I've already caught, there we go. This is what I wanted to show you, which is really exciting. So I just want to point out that this McKinsey study was done in 2020, so sort of in the second wave of the pandemic. It's obviously changed since then. So before the pandemic in 2017, 48% of executives said that the most important thing about digital strategy in their organization was cost savings. Like, we've got to cut costs, operational streamlining, all good things, right?
2017 feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?
No kidding, right?
Yeah.
And today, it's really decreased. So only 10% feel the way they used to. 38% are now saying that investment in digital technologies is important, essential, and key for your competitive advantage. So you have to be able to refocus your business around digital technology. There we go. And so obviously, in the past, learning management systems or learning technology may have been like a nice to have, or maybe just as an aside, or no, we just use that for employee training. And now it's where is it? It's huge. Everything might be driven by that. And so a few more just studies for you that, industries are open to more experimentation. 72%, in fact, during the pandemic saw an openness to experimentation. And those who invested more in those, expenses or ongoing commitments to having that digital infrastructure, 67% in fact, are really seeing that is going to support their business moving forward. So take a look at some of these studies. There's lots out there, but we're going to see more and more evaluation of how businesses have shifted during the pandemic coming out in the next little while, right? So here's a pause for thought. How integrated is your learning technology or your tech stack with the rest of your business? One thing that I would really love to see more of, especially as an instructional designer and as someone with former digital marketing experience, I want data. I want to look at the analytics. And wouldn't it be great to have the business intelligence analytics linked with your learning and reporting systems? So if you're not leveraging these, how can you? And maybe where should you, right? So something to consider, and making sure that you have the right tools that do these things if you need them. A couple case studies to share. So I'm really glad someone mentioned that they had to shut down their in-person events. They were counting on revenue from in-person training or conferences. So a lot of professional associations are, of course, like their sole purpose and their sole revenue really are those in-person conferences. And a lot of these groups shifted successfully to virtual conferences. And I was kind of curious to see how and exactly where they did better. But the benefit is that more people could participate, right? They were able to lower the barrier and cost to participants to come in. And so by that, they actually made their events more inclusive. So even if it's just time zones or, offering more space in a popular session, they didn't have to limit it to the 30 chairs that were in that room, right? So what we saw, and here's some statistics to share, 28% of event professionals were able to actually profit from a virtual event, right? And so in some cases, almost 11% exceeded the profit of the physical event, which is great. 39% of events were able to recuperate about 20% of their revenue by shifting. And so what we're seeing is that flexibility and virtual conferences may not ever go away. I just attended a really cool one on learning accessible design last Friday that I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to because it was held in a different country, right? So how great is that? There are no barriers these days to learning. Another example is like how many of us used online fitness courses during the pandemic, right? This is a great example of how learning technology can shift the industry.
Not
Right?
nearly as much as I should have. Is the answer to that.
Yeah, I looked up an icon for yoga app, but I couldn't find it. I did find, however, this dumbbell one. And so I
Yeah.
think whoever invested in dumbbells that you could buy for at-home workouts are really, like, they're probably making a killing right now. So anyway, as you can see, learning management technology and systems, they're not just for for big businesses. It's anyone can use them now. And it's all about how we embrace these concepts of open learning, online learning, and learning with others, but in a virtual way.
You're on a roll, and I don't want to interrupt. I just want to pop in quickly and do a quick time check. It's 10:45.
Oh yeah, great, thanks.
Just so we can leave some time for people. We got a couple of good questions coming up in the chat. So
Okay, yeah, great. I'm just wrapping this one up. I just had a few thoughts for you from a e-commerce perspective. So, you know, if your learning management system is not connected or it doesn't have an e-commerce feature, you may want to think about that because this is one of the easiest ways to shift, right? So maybe it's a great point to take a question, Ryan. Do you want to just call out a salient question that you'd like me to answer at this point?
absolutely. So this question, I'm going to again paraphrase because people are typing in short form. So the way I believe this question is phrased is we're moving from in-person classes to online. I think that this is something that this person is trying to figure out the process. Can you recommend any good first steps for embarking on that journey?
That's a great question. So this is the perfect opportunity to, if you don't have in-house instructional designers or learning experience designers, to reach out to someone like us. And a lot of the vendors that sell learning management technology will also be able to point you in the right direction. So the nice thing about working with professionals is we've done this before. So we do have a project approach. We take the principles of adult education and learning experience design. We work with you, the subject matter expert. We are not the subject matter experts, but we work with you to design an experience. So we look at all the things and all the factors like, I need to make this amount, or my learners need this type of experience, and we create that together. So that would be my advice, of course. And it's actually a really good time to think about, you know, if you haven't worked with instructional designers or learning experience designers, now is a great time to do that. And just in general, if like maybe you still don't have a learning management system, it's okay. A lot of organizations are in the same boat. There's still time to adopt learning technology. Of course, those who already had that infrastructure in place were able to shift and pivot and be more successful sooner, but you could still get on the bandwagon, I guess. So yeah, hopefully that was a good tie back into that question.
Absolutely. So the next question is actually leads into it very nicely. I designed directly into the LMS for a couple of universities. Unfortunately, many large educational institutions believe that teachers can double as instructional designers. What do you do when you're working with a company or an organization to try and shift that culture?
That's a great question. So I'm hearing 2 points. I'm just going to paraphrase. So one is designing directly in the learning management system. Awesome. There's pros and cons to that for sure. And then the second is as an instructor. So as a subject matter expert or professor, instructor, whatever title you have, there's a lot of pressure on you to design your own learning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, the way that this question's phrased, I believe that there's frustration around leadership believing that teachers, in-person trainers,
Mm,
make for qualified instructional designers, and there's pressure to
yeah.
have them perform in the systems.
Yeah, I
Um,
completely understand. Yeah. So I can speak to that from a personal perspective. So I used to be a teacher. I taught French immersion and French language at the secondary level. So I was a high school teacher. I was like really keen on technology and always integrated it where I could in my learning, but I wasn't an instructional designer yet, and I remember sitting in a session one day during a Pro D being like, what is this? How does this relate to my teaching? There was very little training out there in terms of for educators to learn about how to use technology successfully. There is quite a lot of onus to do a lot of professional development on your own. And there are lots of associations where instructional designers and educators pair up and we share those learnings. I'm part of some of those groups. If you want to connect with me, I can get you in touch. The thing though is to be really clear on, I am a teacher and educator. This is my subject matter expertise. I may not always know how to deliver this successfully online. I need support. And those organizations, the post-secondary ones I'm thinking of that are the most successful, the ones here in Canada I can speak to, have their own instructional design team that they support. They work with you, the educators. So most universities and most post-secondary institutions have that. And if they don't, advocate for it. Absolutely, you need support. So again, that's actually, I think that ties into my next and my last slides. Do you mind if I just go into this? I'm really
Absolutely.
excited about this, which is the industry has changed. There's so much more onus to support employees like yourself, the educators, and to support businesses to really do this well and to do it properly. And what that means is we're seeing an increase in accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities, or just like, you know, anyone participating online. That we're really considering the experience. And to do that, there's a little bit of ownership that we as designers have to take on, and that the technology needs to do to support us. So in the past, we heard a lot of, no, we don't need to design accessible learning, or we don't need an accessible website, or we don't have employees with disabilities, so we don't need to change anything, or we don't have customers or learners with disabilities, we don't need to make it accessible. Or people who wanted to embrace that and like the idea of it thought it was a bit too intimidating in terms of budget, time, and effort. What I'm excited about is that things are changing. Now we're asking the question, is this inclusive? Can we do better? Is this going to make people feel part of our culture and like that they're an important actor and agent in this work we're doing? So we're getting serious about diversity and inclusion, and that means as well that we need to provide people with the support and the tools to do this in a virtual way. And what I love is that we're seeing an increase in distributed learning. So what that means is, the sharing of information is easier. So I'm going to assume, and just to bring up that person's question again, educators, you're not alone. Everyone else is in the same boat too, right? Learn from each other. Thanks to learning technology, we can do that. There's a lot of coaching that can happen virtually, or crowdsourcing of sharing of learning resources and lesson plans, right? And so what I mentioned I was committed to in my personal journey at the beginning is our team's working a lot more on these sort of meta resources. We are designing resources to help workplaces such as yours support and hire and work with people with disabilities, especially people with neurodiverse needs, so people on the autism spectrum or people with intellectual disabilities. So here's a case study. During COVID, a lot of federal and government funding was injected into the workforce, and a lot of resources and knowledge hubs came out of that. And one of them is the inclusiveworkplace.ca. It's also available in French, and it's to support the trifecta of people looking for jobs that were disproportionately displaced by COVID. So like people in the neurodiverse and the autism spectrum were really impacted by COVID. And the businesses that want to hire more diverse employees, as well as the employment agencies and the job coaches. So do check that out. It's a really great example of how government is supporting workplaces to be more inclusive. And also, big companies and corporations are purposely injecting quite a considerable budget into the software to train and to provide certifications on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also providing it in an accessible way. So I think we can really learn from both the public and private sectors right now. So, one last thought for you is to consider where your organization's at in your journey towards web accessibility, and that includes your learning management system. It includes your online learning tools and offerings and how those things work together. So be really picky about what you're using. And if you notice your organization isn't using the right tool, then ask questions. This is where instructional designers and educators and sort of the learning design people, we can really be changing businesses. So on that, I'm gonna ask if anyone has questions. This is a little summary of the last point. So access to web-based learning is just good for everyone and also drastically improves everybody's experience, not just people with disabilities.
So we have one question here, and this is a technology question, I think in general, but I think it can apply nicely to your last section. Alternatives to Zoom.
Yes. So it depends on your audience. It depends on your user experience, but there are a lot of great tools. For example, Google Meet has given Zoom a run for its money in terms of the closed captions that it can give, right? I think one thing we haven't talked about is all of the options in terms of virtual meeting and conferencing tools has really the pressure is on them. And not only that, but they've shifted and they are constantly improving. Like how many Zoom updates have we seen, right? We're seeing lots of groups using Microsoft Teams successfully. Whatever you choose, use it intentionally, train your people, make sure that you are giving them success to use it. You can't just throw people a new tool and expect them to figure it out. That's not successful. So I'm going to sort of be agnostic in these things, and which is, you have to pick the right system for your organization, and that's also something external consultants can help with. So, yeah, good way to end it. I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to sort of summarize here. There's a couple of things I want to do just to wrap up, which is you're welcome to share this in the chat or just take away this question with you, which is how are you going to apply or action anything you learned today? So as an instructional designer, we always want to know how are you using what you're learning, right? So if you're taking this away, if you're taking away a doggy bag or some takeaway cups here, then how will you take this back to your team? And are you able to assess where your organization is at? You can also use the handout that is available. So you may want to rate, our business is doing really well in this respect, but we really need to focus on this other one instead. So you're welcome to take the handout. It's a nice summary, and you can also use it as a tool to talk about these things with your team.
So the handout, you guys should see it in that GoToWebinar panel. There should be a little drop down that says handout. It will be showing up in just a second. While we wait for the handout, we had one final question. Fantastic presentation, Leah. Great shout outs for ID's learning designers, instructional designers. How about mentioning a few sources where people can learn more about this path?
So more about learning technology and instructional design in general. Well, Lambda has some really great resources. They often do these webinars with industry professionals. I also have a blog, but I would really recommend sort of reaching out and following the very active and very engaging professional associations out there. There's quite a few. There's a lot of e-learning publications as well. Even if you're not an instructional designer, the topics and the things that they talk about are so important and so inspiring from a business perspective. So I find sharing those articles with my network, the people even who aren't learning experienced designers are really keen to hear well, what's hot? What's working with other groups? How can I continue supporting clients or employees in certain ways? So my tip would be to start with the e-learning publications and the professional associations, and to take advantage of a lot of this great sort of free content out there.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add there, Ryan? I know you guys have quite a lot of stuff too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a plethora of resources. I've seen quite a few people just asking about, the journey for like discovering technologies and, auditing their own company to figure out what their needs are and that kind of stuff. I highly recommend checking out the Lambda blog. Obviously, Leah is a great source of information. Um, if you have questions, specific questions, make sure you ask them. We will be getting back to everybody. If we didn't get to your question in the chat, we will be following up with you and trying to answer your questions to the best of your ability, our ability. In addition, there is the handout. Check that out. It should have just popped up in the handout section in that GoToWebinar panel. If you don't have it, if you can't see it, don't worry. You will get an email containing that handout with the recording of the webinar. So it'll be accessible there. And I think that we are at time. Leah, thank you so much for prepping this presentation, all the work you went into it. If anybody wants to get a hold of Leah for further questions or to ask about her services, she's available at leahchanglearning.com, or you can email her. The email address is there in the slide. If you have any questions for Lambda, our product, services, what we offer, or even just general industry, whatever, fire us a question. You can find us at www.lambdasolutions.net and just reach out. This webinar, when it closes, there will be a survey that pops up afterwards. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you thought about it. We'd love to find out if there's a way that we can improve these things, make them better, more educational, easier to access for you. So let us know, fill out the survey. That concludes the webinar today. Thank you everybody for attending. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you.